My name is Nicky Balestrieri, and I'm an event designer. I'm here to talk to you a little bit about my style of design, which is content-driven in nature, and to show you how thinking like an editor can enrich the experiences that you design for your clients. I got a clicker and everything, it's exciting. Before I dive into our process and our method and show you guys some case studies, one of the things I wanted to do was start with a little bit about my own story. I have a kind of a peculiar background where I started working actually in nightlife, promoting nightclubs in the early 2000s while paying for NYU. It was a really interesting time in New York when the meatpacking district in West Chelsea had not yet really been developed, and it was a very hyper-creative environment to grow up in. After that, I moved to Crowbar, where it was kind of the last great mega club of New York, where it was really creative, and my job was to basically create a Cirque du Soleil performance every Thursday, Friday, and Saturday for 3,000 partygoers, which was a very interesting thing to do when you're a 20-year-old. After all that madness, I decided to grow up and get a real job. And I tried my hand working at Coty, which was short-lived because I didn't know how to wear a tie. And after that, I really found my stride when I joined the team at Paper Magazine, which had just started a company, a creative services company called Extra Extra. There, I was really inspired by the people that were sitting on the other side of the hall. These were these editors who were so obsessed with finding the weirdest, smallest, coolest emerging trend and then sharing it with people. So it was a very creative environment, but that it was also something that was very collaborative. So one of the things that was also really inspirational when I was there was how these experts, these editors who were experts in fashion and music and culture and art and celebrity would get together, pool their ideas, and around a certain thematic create a magazine. So I started thinking, what about if we turned these editors into design contributors for our events? So all of a sudden, our music editors became DJs and talent bookers. Our fashion editor, my friend Luigi, who's my creative partner today, became a tableau stylist and fashion show producer. Kim, our editor-in-chief, who is famed for being able to identify really cool new emerging talents, would find collaborators for us. I have friends who run a company called Confetti System, Nick and Julie, whom I met that way and work nearly monthly with. They're confetti artists and amazing, by the way. You should look them up. My style, which I developed at Paper and continue at BMF Media today, where I serve as the managing creative director, applies an editorial, or rather a kind of narrative approach to everything that we design. So everything starts with a story. And from there, we generate our design to contextualize the brand within an environment. So we look to art and fashion and culture and social media influencers, celebrities, cutting-edge technologies, anything that we can find relevant to the brand categorically, we apply to create this immersive type of environment. From there, we layer on social and PR messaging to create an amplification strategy. And before I actually go on, I do want to just say that I think content is an overused word by a majority of marketers. And I want to just clarify that in this session, really what I'm talking about when I say content as it pertains to event design is the things that inspire us to enrich an experience with like-minded activations to help illustrate our brand and their message. So obviously the goal of all of this process and all that we've kind of created is to make our events not just memorable, but also mediable. I like this thing, okay. All right, so a little bit about the landscape. Basically, content marketing and the rise of content marketing has shifted the way our industry thinks about experiential. So I think that producers and designers would benefit thinking more like editors. Look at events as you would a magazine or a website. They're communication tools, right? Add in layered messages, rich visuals to tell a cohesive story. When a brand tells a cohesive story, it makes it feel natural and makes a brand proposition authentic. The images here are from a program that I'm currently executing for Cointreau, where Cointreau functions as a patron of the arts, and as such, actually, all of their marketing initiatives, all of their events are tied to 6 different creatives. You see Kate Shelter, who's a fashion stylist turned a watercolorist, Athena Calderon, who's an interior designer, the Wits, who are CFDA incubator graduates and amazing designers themselves. So, we'll discuss in this program a little bit about how to use market research and the narrative method to form concepts and engage guests, hopefully to create lasting impressions. So the first thing you always have to do when you're getting ready to do an event design is we always start, like any editorial process, you start with market research. The first thing that I think is you start, obviously, with your brand. So you want to establish tone and personality. These are 4 clients that I've worked with in the past, and when you think about Target, you think about them being fun yet stylish, playful, but they're not jokesters. When you think about Cointreau, as I mentioned, they're a patron of the arts. So anything that is in support of creatives or artisans, that's the right kind of tone for them. Lanvin is the very definition of chic. So basically, that attitude of so stylish it appears that they couldn't even care, but of course we all know that they do. Refinery 29, which we'll go actually into a case study of, was born of street style culture. So they are informed, they're cool but not cruel, and always hungry for more knowledge of style. So, let's see, audience, okay. The second thing that you want to do when designing an event is understand your audience, right? Designing for a consumer is different than designing for an influencer, that is different designing for an editor. So when you go out to set out to entertain a consumer wants to understand the brand very literally, right? It's tactile, it's physical. So perhaps you wanted to design something in terms of a discovery. For British Airways, we actually created a 17-room choose-your-own-adventure novel that was an event experience of 17 different great new things that were happening in the UK, and essentially getting people excited about hopefully visiting the UK. For influencers, these are folks who get invited to absolutely every single type of event that exists. So if you're being tasked with throwing a dinner party for a wine that focuses on artisanship, perhaps you start with, as we did for Ruffino, a pottery class. We literally had all of our guests come to a pottery studio, and then after they painted their pottery, they went up and got to meet the master winemaker. The editors, of course, are the hardest to please. They get to go to absolutely everything, and they've seen absolutely everything. And most people always do, I think, big launches and think about hiring the biggest talent that they can, spending the most amount of money on decor as they can. But I think what you have to do is do something totally unique. So for Paper's 25th anniversary, we thought about the talent in a really unique combination. So we had, as expected, the coolest bands of that time, which was Mark Ronson and the Virgins. And then we mined the past 2 decades of our covers to identify Queen Latifah and Liza Minnelli to perform with them. So that combination is not something that I can tell you anyone that was there that night forgot. So the last part that you want to kind of remember is that everything that we do has to start with our client's message. So what we want them to take away, what we want them to learn or remember, comes always from that one piece. You should be designing in scale and repetition in your event space to always kind of be delivering back on that message. This is the red thread that goes throughout your event design. When I started out, I had this really amazing mentor who was actually my cousin who owned Crowbar. And they don't call these people this anymore, but they used to call them nightlife impresarios. But he had 27 restaurants, nightclubs, and bars between Chicago, Miami, and New York, and the crown jewel was Crowbar, New York. And he told me that when you design an event, the big strokes are what make impressions, and the small ones are what make memories. So if we are to make strokes with our design, then perhaps content is the color for our brush. How then do you design with content? Quite simply, designing with content is writing a visual story. So I wanted to use this case study because it's really recent, very topical, and got an insane amount of media attention around it. But this was Refinery 29's Country Club activation, which was both a country club and a miniature golf course that was designed during Fashion Week to essentially do Refinery's first pure brand experience, meaning it wasn't for an advertiser. It was actually for the Refinery 29 brand. The event, which was conceptualized by also an Extra alumni and my friend Albie Houston at Refinery 29, was the very definition of an editorial collaboration. The objective was to demonstrate that during Fashion Week, which is a totally exclusive, like so hip it hurts type environment where no one gets invited unless you're like in this tiny little industry and you get to watch from kind of the outside in, we wanted to say that fashion can be inclusive, and Refinery's brand identity is an inclusive brand. So the design, so that was kind of the idea of this fun, playful country club. The design was inspired by the physical website itself. So think about the blank page that's populated with photography and imagery and color. The unique twist on it was that everything that we made was not necessarily a literal thing of like, oh, we like Marc Jacobs, here's a Marc Jacobs golf course. It was from the editor's point of view. So it has a very quirky sensibility, also with a cutting-edge style. This is a rendering that was done by our amazing art director, Stephen Carey, who, this is the golf course hole that was featured in the New York Times and is inspired by Proenza Schooler. I'll talk a little bit more about the design of it in a second. So the venue, when we had to do this, obviously if we want white space, you need a blank canvas. So we started off by creating vast amounts of white walls that we then utilized to populate with content, similar as you would design a website. So here you see the Refinery 29 Fashion Pros. So those are the 29 designers that they were celebrating during Fashion Week. Washes of both print graphics and LED lights to bring together color. More color, pink golf courses, who doesn't like that? And then, we got to lighting as well. One of the things that's really unique on Refinery's website that they do is this really unique ombre gradient. So in real life, we saw that being executed and inspired by Dan Flavin's neon art installations. So you see a lot of neon work here, including what we call the entrance gate to the experience. As I mentioned, digital and detailed touch points are key in a design, and here there was no exception. They were interwoven absolutely everywhere. So on the digital side, speaking to technology, the fact that they are a website, everything that you did when you checked in at the pro shop was all done on a custom microsite that mimicked the experience of the actual website itself. Every square inch of the space was designed to be photographed and put up on Instagram. In fact, the article that was written in the New York Times just, I think, last week or 2 weeks ago was about how designers are designing for Instagram, and this was the case study in that article. Everything down to scorecards, say that fast, golf balls, and everything else, all again kind of had these quirky, cheeky, brightly colored and playful design details. And we even took it down to the brand identity. So on their website, there's iconography. If you see, if you were talking about fashion or music, they have icons. So we created one, again, that was very specific to the country club. Let's see. If you're going to make a story, you got to have characters. So rather than having event staff, we had models and actors who were trained on the brand messaging and took all of the guests from front of house to back of house, from check-in to check-in to the pro shop, to greeting them outside, to working in the snack bar, to actually working at each of the holes and giving them tips and advice on how to get through it. The collections of clothes that they wore were sourced from their advertisers as well. But the real interesting part, I think, and the meat of the event was in the links. And when someone comes to you and says, I've got this idea and I want you to design a miniature golf course of fashion, you don't really know where to start. So as I had mentioned, I started by getting all the fashion editors of Refinery 29 in a room and said, what do these brands mean to you, Refinery 29? So it wasn't about, necessarily the expected things. You see here Marc Jacobs was inspired by his fragrances. Proenza Schouler was inspired by their use of iridescent materials in their handbags and their signature grommets, which were deconstructed and created as obstacles for the golf course. You see Public School, who made that silly hat that you see every hipster in the world wear that's absolutely amazing on the street, became the big target for this particular one. Again, working with an editorial property, you're never lacking for really interesting people to work with. And again, the collaborators for the experience were really key here. So Atlantic Decadene as our DJ, Banks as our performer, and Layla Gohar, who makes these incredible landscapes, which obviously felt right in a country club, of like food art. All people who are subjects on actually the website, who we then molded into this design ethos that we were creating for the brand itself. All right, takeaway time. So I don't think I can give you all my tricks in 15 years in a few minutes, and I have like 2 left. So these are 3 of them that I think work for me every time, and if you are an event designer in the room, take these to heart, I hope. Designers have to be businessmen. The first question you ask yourself as a designer in planning this event is, what is your client's communication objective? Or whom are they trying to reach, and what are you trying to say to them? I'm so surprised that people can't instantly answer that question when I ask them about, and when they're starting out with a request for an event. Practice your skills as a designer inside that framework, and your guests will learn what you want them to. This is an event that we did for Toyota. We started asking the question, saying it was a press trip, and I said, well, who buys the car? And when they told me, they had done tons of research on who this person was, so we designed the experience for her. God is in the packaging. We're designers. We build physical things, right? So as a designer, it's what's on the outside that counts. Every touch point, every detail should speak to the brand's identity and harken back to the message that we're trying to communicate. From the napkin to the headliner, this is the red thread, and really there are no shortcuts in this particular realm in being a successful designer. This was my last event for Extra Extra, which was the Target feed launch, and down to the lamps that hung in the store, which were made out of product, we left no stone kind of unturned. The final part is tell a good story. What you're doing is if you're doing it right, I guess, that a good experiential marketing program is a grand narrative. It has a story arch. It has a beginning, it has a middle, it has an end. It has interesting characters along the way. And if you're doing this well, then you draw your guest in the way like a good book or a good movie would. Bit by bit, you share the excitement, and it reaches crescendo or climax. The last thing I would say is always trust your gut. I've been offering you kind of a glimpse into my world and what we do at BMF Media, but this is just how I do things. As a designer, it's your voice that's unique in this world, and I think the world needs more voices telling beautiful stories. So it was nice chatting at you, and I look forward to seeing your voices. So, thank you.